Okay, I think we'll get this going, and the rest will join, as we move along. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gabriel. I'm the Partnership Director at APACMed, short for the Asia Pacific Medical Technology Association. A very warm welcome to today's webinar. This is the second event of the Founder Series, which is an initiative of APACMed Startup Committee to support the medical device, the diagnostics, and digital health startup in the Asia Pacific region. We are delighted to welcome all of you today. And I'm very, very honored to have senior business leaders who can join us at today's webinar and today's dialogue. So a very warm welcome to Anselm from Philips, Fred from Steris, Peter from Johnson & Johnson, and Chris from KPMG. Yeah. So maybe allow me to give a very short introduction about APACMed. So a few things to say about APACMed. First of all, we are not for profit. We are not for profit MedTech Association. Number two, we were set up by the industry for the industry. And basically what we do is that we lead efforts to advance MedTech and also to raise the standards of care for patients. And very quickly, just to share with you a little bit about our membership base. Yeah, so we have a membership base of about 140 members. There are 4 categories of membership, but I just want to highlight 2 categories, the corporates and the startup, because this is the basis of today's discussion. So if you look at the first column on the left, they represent our corporate members. If you look at the top 30 medtech companies globally, 20 of them are already members of APACMed, and we're really delighted to have them on board as members. The middle category is the startup, and startup is a growing, community. We only had 1 startup in 2007, and to date we have close to maybe 60 startups from across the medical device, the diagnostics, and the digital health space. And this will be, will drive the next phase of growth for APACMed. And because we have a growing, startup community, what we have done this year together with the startup community is to launch a program called the Founder Series. Yeah. So there are basically 3 components to the Founder Series. The first component is the Founders Campus, and this is where we give our startups access to experts, industry experts, industry advisors, like today, for example. When we talk about how startups and global companies can cooperate, we bring on board senior business leaders to share with you how they typically work with startups. So that's one, the first C. The second C is collaborate. So we have a partnership agreement with MedTech Innovator, which is a US-based MedTech accelerator. We helped bring the program to Asia last year. So this year is the second year of our partnership. And through the program, what we hope to do is to facilitate the engagement between the startups and the global companies. Yeah. And last but not least, the third C is the circles, where we hope to put together a set of master classes for different categories of startups across medical device, diagnostics, and digital health, and also look at offering one-to-one mentorship with our senior business leaders and industry advisors. So that's broadly the framework of the program. And if you look on the right side, we already have we've laid up a series of activities that we are planning from now till the end of the year. So this, like I said earlier on, this is the second of the Founders Series event. 2 weeks from now, we'll have another a webinar around product innovation through human centered design, right till December. And last but not least, I want to thank our supporting partners for coming on board to support this Founders Series program. With their support, we are able to come up with, topics, that are relevant to the startup community, and also to leverage on their community to help, grow the startup community. So with this, I want to hand this session over to Chris, our moderator for today, who will lead us through our discussion on how to capture the eyes of the corporates.
Great, thanks a
Over
lot.
to you, Chris. Yeah.
Thanks, Gabriel. And maybe I can just say on behalf of everyone, congratulations for getting this initiative off the ground, both to you, to APACMed, to the wider community, because I think for many of us who work in this industry, to improve the health and the care of the people out there will require a multi-stakeholder effort. So getting this initiative going, you deserve a lot of credit in the APACMed team. So thanks a lot for that. Before I let you off the hook entirely, I do see we already have one question about this session. So I believe it's being recorded and can be shared after, right? Is that correct? Okay. So for everyone out there who had already asked a question about that. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Probably if you're like me, I'm on back-to-back sort of virus, COVID, pandemic-related calls and meetings every single day. So I hope that this is not only interesting, but maybe a bit of a reprieve from kind of the day-to-day rhetoric at the moment. So of course, probably we'll have some COVID-related questions that come through, but that's not the main focus of this discussion. Before I get too far into the program, maybe I can just lay out exactly how we're going to run things. So I'll make a few opening remarks. And then we're very fortunate to have 3 speakers from multinational organizations that are very active in the medical device space and very active in partnerships. So they're going to give us really a view from each of their respective organizations about how they view partnerships, what is the strategic direction of the company. So I hope those on the phone who are in the kind of innovation space or other stakeholders in the ecosystem can appreciate the information that's going to be shared. And I think the other aspect to this session today that I've aligned with the speakers on is we want a high volume of interaction. So this is not meant to be a kind of one-way seminar to everyone, but actually we want it to be very interactive. So as each speaker is talking, please put your questions in the chat. We're going to stop after each speaker to actually address some of those questions. So we're not going to just present the whole time and wait till the end. We're gonna take the questions as we go. So please be thinking of those questions. Give us the hard questions out there. Tell us about things that you've experienced that have worked or maybe not worked, and let's make this interactive and let's make the Founders series a success. And one last thing before we get started, we're going to have a few polls throughout the session today just to kind of get a sense of who's in the audience and what they're experiencing. So we're going to launch our first poll now. So maybe Nishan, you can pull that up for people to answer here. And if everyone could just take a couple of seconds and just kind of fill this in, and then we'll share the results here. It says poll closed. So did that work?
Sorry, maybe we can relaunch. I think, I think someone accidentally clicked on the end poll.
Okay.
Nishan, do you mind relaunching it?
Sorry, everyone. Try it again. Okay, so maybe you can share the results there, Nishan. All right, so great that I presume most people wanted to join this session because they were in fact seeking partnerships, so that's great. And we've got some people on the phone who orchestrate the partnerships, which is also helpful. To those 5% out there who don't believe in partnerships, it'll maybe be good to hear your feedback as we go along today. And again, please ask us the tough questions, and maybe we can try and somehow change the mind as we go. Okay, and we'll have a few more polls along the way. So thanks for that, Nishan. All right, so I'll just give a few opening remarks from kind of my perspective of the world in KPMG, and I'm going to cover off a couple of different areas. So I'll remind people about a project that KPMG and APACMed did together that I think is of value to the members out there. I'll talk about a bit more from our perspective, what we see of what's evolving around us, and also some of the kind of lessons learned and case studies I've seen in terms of these matchmaking between big companies and small companies or other forms of partnership. Just a little bit about myself. So I'm the director of our healthcare and life sciences practice at KPMG, based out of Singapore, but working across the region. I've been posted in different parts of the world, so I've seen various aspects to how healthcare works, and I'm from the industry myself. And a lot of my work is focused on what are basically called public-private partnerships. So the design and implementation of universal health coverage programs, looking at sustainable health financing models, technology commercialization, value proposition development. So I'm kind of at the interface there between public and private healthcare reform, which is quite exciting. And also I do work with a number of the startups just in terms of mentorship and boot camps too. So that part excites me quite a bit to see the innovation aspect to the industry too. Okay, so this is the Footprint project that I alluded to earlier, and if you go to APACMed's website, you can find this information. But this is kind of information that's available to the members that you can subscribe to. So I'm not going to go through all the details. This is the high-level snapshot summary, but there's a lot of other information underneath. I think some of the headlines, though, that sort of stick out to me are, on one hand, it's great to be in the medical device industry. It's a kind of booming industry, and you can see in Asia, the growth is accelerated. And also it's dominated by middle to small companies by volume. So the majority of the companies are on kind of that end of the spectrum. But a couple of challenges, right? So whereas from a kind of business perspective, Asia is usually about 20 to 25% of the global total, you can see that only about 10% of patents are currently coming from the region. So opportunity there, let's say, to drive more innovation. And from a broader health system perspective, you can see the main challenge here is, while the investments made by the industry in terms of job creation, manufacturing, innovation can actually contribute 2% or sometimes even more to a country's GDP, if you look at total healthcare expenditure by a country, usually less than 1% of GDP is going to medical devices. So I think there's a challenge here in terms of driving the innovation, but also driving the recognition by the country leaders that there's a value being created by the medical device industry. So something I think the Founder Series we can all work on together. But anyway, you have this information through APACMed if you want to dig into it a bit further. Again, my own work is heavily related to the design and implementation of health reform programs. The biggest health reform program going on globally and especially in Asia at the moment is universal health coverage. So that's Sustainable Development Goal number 3, that all countries have to complete by 2030. And of course, many startups in the region have ambitions beyond Asia, but I'm kind of operating under the assumption for this call that since it's APACMed, we're really focused on what we can drive in the Asia Pacific region. And I put the link here to the bottom to the report, so I'm not going to, again, go through so much detail, but I've shown this chart before in other APACMed forums. I find it so simple, yet for some reason so still sort of overlooked in a way. And this is a study where we spoke to governments around the world about what is the appropriate role of the private sector as it pertains to healthcare. And as you can see, most governments still believe that the stewardship of healthcare belongs at the public sector level. This is very much a political, government-driven program. And most of the governments kind of view, let's say, pharmaceutical, medical device industry down there and kind of the products and supply chain aspect, and they're okay with that. But there's a lot of opportunity and gray area in the middle as it pertains to the provision of services in healthcare and even how healthcare financing works, right? Whether it be novel contracting models or microfinancing or new leasing arrangements or whatever that may be. So I encourage all the kind of innovators out there to really think not only about the product, that technology that you're creating, but actually how you can move up this kind of value chain a bit toward what the governments truly need to make healthcare function. And also, when you're thinking about the partnerships with the multinational corporations, they face the same challenge, right? So the more you can think in these terms, and the other side of the table, the government, the healthcare system, how you're adding value there, I think the value in the partnership will also increase. So anyway, there's a lot more details in the report link down there. Another report that we just released about a month ago, which was fortuitous timing, is basically around the sustainability of healthcare financing. And so the concept here is, while universal health coverage is a great ambition over the next 10 years, ultimately it still will never be enough. And again, I put the link, so I'm not going to go through all the detail, but there's a few elements to it. First of all, we all know that the demand of healthcare is only going to grow. I'm not going to go into detail. Every healthcare call, they talk about the demand of healthcare, but that aspect will continue to grow and be a burden on country budgets. But actually, if you look at the base under which healthcare is built, from a government perspective, that is also unsustainable. And the reason is because a tax-funded healthcare system, many countries in Asia and Southeast Asia don't even meet the 15% GDP criteria that you need to keep taxing to make healthcare sufficient. And many of the people working are in the informal economy. So the ways in which governments raise revenue from healthcare is also unsustainable in and of itself. And then the real kind of point of the report is that rather than telling countries they need to put more money toward healthcare, actually we need to increase the efficiency of the way healthcare works. And in fact, in a KPMG study with World Economic Forum, we estimate that if countries spent 30% of what they do today on healthcare, but made it more efficient, they would achieve the same outcome in terms of life expectancy. So I think if you're an innovator in this space, there's so many opportunities in terms of, let's say, preventative health programs, immunization programs, the way healthcare purchasing works, both on the service side as well as the product side, the human capital aspect. So again, keep this in mind as you deal with the multinationals, because this is also what they have to help drive. And in the report, we provide many kind of new ways that healthcare financing is trying to evolve itself. But just to put that out there. I'll just go through a few kind of case studies of things that I've seen. And again, I put the links down here at the bottom where all of these articles can be seen. My perception recently of kind of startups in medical device space, whether it be the regulated side or more the kind of digital side, is many people are getting into the kind of diagnostics game, which is important. I mean, you can see the volume of diagnostics continues to grow, but in some sense, the value deteriorates over time. And so it becomes a bit more of a volume game than a value game. And so again, I think if you're an innovator in this space, considering not only the diagnostic product, but also the service you're providing, the potential financing models that you can provide. So one example for a diagnostics company would be maybe you can work with a medical device company, but you could also be working with a pharmaceutical company for a companion diagnostic. You could be working with a telco company that's trying to monitor people. So consider how you work with different stakeholders and the data that you're collecting and how that can be of greater value to the broader system. And just on that point too, here's another kind of case study we had written up about the trend and particularly genetic testing and the data aspect there. And I use this case study because a lot of the startups that I see, I think they understand that healthcare data is important, but it's not actually part of their business plan. And in my opinion, the future valuation of a company, big or small, is going to be in large part based on the healthcare data that you're able to collect. And so this is just an example in the genetic testing space where you've got clinically validated genetic testing that's going on in the institutional setting, but you've increasingly got many applications and tools out there for consumer-generated genetic testing information. And of course, it's not maybe as validated as what the clinical setting is, but the reality is you need to think about all of these data sets and how you can merge them together and create a better story for the system. So that was this kind of case study. Also, last mile. I mean, if you look at most country governments and talk about what do they really need from a healthcare perspective, it's not urban centers of excellence. It's actually reaching the broad masses of their population. But still, I think in the private sector, we have a challenge of how to actually make this into a viable business model. And I just give one example here of Tonic, which is now the single largest voluntary insurer in Bangladesh. Look at all the services they can provide to the healthcare system. So 24/7 chat, portable records, tailored content. And they're basically considered the digital front door to universal health coverage. But actually, the most interesting part of this case study is that Tonic is a subsidiary of Telenor, which is a Norwegian telco company. So it just goes to show that there are actually many players trying to kind of angle at how to make healthcare work better. And then finally, I just kind of talk about, this is a big topic, of course, cybersecurity, data privacy. You know, you take a place like Singapore where maybe we've actually fallen backwards a bit on using advanced technology for the sake of healthcare because of fears of privacy. But, this is an interesting article we wrote about actually how to turn the conversation a bit from being cybersecurity as a requirement for compliance, but actually how can you make that part of your value proposition, right? So if you're an innovator and your device is going to be IoT or it's going to be using healthcare information, how can you actually make cybersecurity and privacy part of your proposition such that it makes it easier for big companies or the healthcare system to want to work with you? So anyway, those are just some quick case studies. I put all the links down there. I don't want to take up too much of the time here. I just close by, these are some of my observations that I've seen in terms of big companies and small companies working together in this industry in the Asia Pacific region. And unfortunately, I have to say, probably the supply of ideas exceeds the demand capacity of taking on new ideas. So that's just a reality, whether it be the number of startups that pitch the big companies or the number of governments who are willing to entertain and pay for new technologies. So a few things here. I mean, sometimes I see a mismatch between a startup, are you on more the health side or on the care side? Those are not the same thing, right? Are you trying to prevent the onset of a disease, or are you trying to manage the lifestyle of a disease, for example, right? And then how does that fit within a big company's portfolio and strategy? It's a nuance, but it's quite important. I think decisions about, are you going to be a regulated device? Are you going to be a kind of over-the-counter B2C type product? And there's different pros and cons there, but you need to be clear on that. I think you'll hear from the big companies today, there is a dynamic of the globalization of these big companies versus kind of the regional needs that they need to take care of. So again, I think from your company perspective, you need to be clear on what are your ambitions from a regional and global perspective. Personally speaking, words like I'm a platform or I'm a universal solution, I think are just kind of, just don't use those words anymore. Is kind of my opinion, because it's become kind of meaningless in a way. Everyone is saying them. And then maybe just lastly, I mean, the multinational corporations are not just banks, right? I mean, these are strategic companies that are paving the way in our industry. So treat them for the value they can provide to your company, not just as a source of financing. And I think the relationship will go a lot further. And most importantly, do your homework. I mean, know who the company is, who the people are, what are their products, what's their legacy, what's their structure like. You got to know these things, because again, the supply is exceeding demand. So I think the competition is very fierce out there. So those are just my initial remarks. And I can kind of interact with some of the questions a bit later. So please do continue to send your thoughts in. But I do want to get to the main presentations, which are the speakers here. Before I do that, maybe Nishan, you can just call up poll number 2, please. So if everyone can just take a minute and fill out the second poll. Okay, share the results, please. All right, so will ecosystem partnerships drive the next generation of healthcare? Majority of people are saying yes, that's a critical enabler. I mean, everyone says yes, right? So I think everyone agrees this is an ecosystem way to work, but maybe some people need a bit more convincing than others. So to the speakers out there, now you've got some challenges in front of you. 5% of people don't believe in partnerships, and 37% of people maybe are a bit dubious on these ecosystem partnerships. So up to you to try and change their minds out there. With that, let's kind of get into the next segment and let the speakers tell you a little bit more about their companies. So we'll first start off with Johnson & Johnson. So Peter Hawks, he's the Asia Pacific head of business development. So it's great that we can have him on here. He's worked in various product categories for Johnson & Johnson, so I think has a great understanding of different therapy areas, and I know has done some investment management fund work as well. So kind of good hybrid type person to be doing business development for a company like Johnson & Johnson. So yeah, Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Everyone can hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Fantastic, excellent. So appreciate everyone taking time out to. In my mind, I think it's a very, very important topic in terms of how we get startups and corporates together and what that ecosystem does look like. As Chris mentioned, I've worked not only in Asia Pacific, but in the US. I spent a couple of years in the US. But coming back to Asia Pacific, as I did a couple of years ago, it was just great to see the evolution of medtech and where it's heading, and the convergence of traditional medical devices and with digital. Certainly, I've seen Asia Pacific leapfrog in terms of its innovation, and in my mind, it certainly rivals innovation happening in the rest of the globe. So it's been exciting to be a part of it for the last couple of years. I thought it might be helpful, and I won't speak for too long, but just to give you some context into how J&J think about innovation and what our network looks like. So we understand and we look at partnerships at all levels. So from the early stage phase right into that mature phase, and we have vehicles or platforms or frameworks to be able to engage companies along the way. And I will touch on the 4 of these, but essentially we have our innovation centres globally around the world. We have our venture capital arm known as Johnson Johnson Development Corporation. We have our J-Labs, which are incubators as well across the globe. And finally, we have more the traditional business development, the more traditional partnerships, which we tend to consider more of a late stage partnerships with companies, perhaps already in the market, looking for a partner to scale and things like that. So if we go a little bit deeper into these, if we could perhaps start off with the innovation centres. So we have 4 of these around the world. We have one in Europe in London, one on the west coast of the US, one on the east coast of the US, and of course we have one in the region here in Shanghai. And really the essence of the innovation centres, and by the way, our innovation centres are just not in medical device, they're in pharma and consumer as well. But it's really to tap into those companies at that early phase. So we're talking pre-revenue here. These companies are often looking for potentially some grant funding or some sort of support from a regulatory or market access perspective. And we're looking for just innovative ideas and new ideas. And one way we achieve that is through running what we call Quickfire Challenges. And you can see some examples down the bottom here where we run these competitions to just continue to create this discussion around innovation in key areas that we're interested in. And there's no secret, clearly digital surgery is one which we're very hot on. We've made some acquisitions in recently, and of course, lung cancer initiative as well, which is absolutely a prevalent and a huge unmet need in this part of the world. If we move to the next slide. We then move to our venture capital arm. So Johnson & Johnson has the oldest corporate venture capital arm globally around the world. It's slightly different to how traditional venture capital arms work. We're not, to be honest, as much interested in the financial return. While that is good and great if we can get one, we're far more interested into the strategic relationship of the organisation. So we often will put in some equity into companies where we believe there might be a strategic fit, but we're maybe not ready to acquire the company. There might be a partnership opportunity later down the track, but at this stage, we think the most appropriate avenue is to put some equity and perhaps take a board seat as well in some of these companies. So we use this very strategically, and as I said, we've had a number of experience, a long history in 45 years in terms of investing in this way, in this manner. If we go to the next slide. I did want to touch on our J-Labs, and what I'm excited about our J-Labs story is that it's come to Asia, and it came to Asia last year with the launch of our Shanghai J-Labs facility. I know there are some APAC members who are also part of J-Labs in Shanghai, and really this enables creativity within an environment that provides startup with resources and networks across not only medical device, but as I mentioned, pharma and consumer as well. So I think this as a really kind of incubator that provides them with all the resources, all the tools to be able to use and utilize, and also that conversation they can have with the corporate around how we think as well. In terms of, there's no kind of strings attached or, Jane, in terms of how that works. So we don't kind of say, hey, we must have a look at this company. But I mean, clearly they're part of our they're not part of our organisation, but part of our network, and the advantage of just understanding what types of ideas and unmet needs these companies are working on enables us to be at the forefront of seeing, okay, what is that cutting edge new device, new technologies, what are the unmet needs that we're seeing people move into, and why is that, and what part of the world are we seeing these unmet needs come up? So again, it enables us, just from a selfish J&J perspective, to really begin to understand what are people looking at and why they're looking at those areas. If you want to find more about J-Labs, there's a link on the screen, which also can take you to our J&J innovation platform as well. And then finally, we have our business development opportunity, and this is very much traditional BD in the BD space that we play. So this is where often companies that already have a product in the market or soon to. And we've made some clear examples on the screen there. So while Auris, we didn't actually do the actual deal, and it's a US company, a lot of the insights that Auris are targeting, and for those that don't know, Auris is a company that is a robotic company that use your natural orifices, I should say, to treat things like lung biopsies and the like. So fascinating company, which we acquired last year. But a number of those insights due to the prevalence of lung cancer and the really initiative started came from Asia Pacific. And then we have on the right there, Knee360, which is a company down in Sydney, Australia, which is really looking at disrupting the flow of care when it comes to a knee procedure. So how do companies, what happens preoperatively, intraoperatively and postoperatively, and ensuring the patient recovers in a quicker time and gets out of the hospital faster, using digital tools and artificial intelligence and things like that. So these are much more traditional partnerships. They come in the likes of a distribution agreement, an R&D agreement, a co-development agreement. But again, these are more kind of traditional players. If you go to the next slide, thanks. This is just another example. That final one is Tanavi. Some of you may know we signed an agreement last year with the largest local robotic company in China in the spine space as well. So just another example of what we're playing in that traditional BD space. This is our network of innovation across the globe. I won't go into detail, but it's fair to say what I'm really pleased is to see that Asia Pacific arm really develop and build the muscle of late. So, we're certainly here in Asia for Asia, which I like to say, and really looking at innovative ideas. And if we go to the final slide, one of those ideas and ways which we actually look to get innovation is partnering with companies like MedTech Innovator. So we've partnered with MedTech Innovator in the US for over 6 or 7 years now. Last year they came out to Asia and we partnered with them again. And this is just another great initiative where you have startups that enter into an accelerator program and have pitch events around the region. And then this is the finals at the MedTech Forum last year in October. And it just gave a platform for that connection between different parts of the MedTech ecosystem. And for many of you, you would have been there, to just get together and to really begin to understand what is the innovation we're seeing in Asia and for Asia. And again, for me, this is just a great opportunity to really understand what's going on locally from a MedTech perspective. So I'll just pause there. To start off with that framework, I'm happy to answer any questions on the specificities, but I did want to just provide that broad framework about how does J&J engage with innovation. So Chris, back to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Peter. And I think, of course, J&J is an embodiment of a company of integrating, businesses together for kind of the broader footprint and good. So thanks for that. And just a reminder to people, if you have questions for Peter and J&J, please do put them in the chat here. There's a couple things that have been asked, so I'll run those by you. In my presentation, I made a statement of kind of having a bit of a negative reaction to words like platform and universal. And maybe that was because I had, like Theranos on the mind or something to that effect. I don't know, but yeah, I'm not trying to, insinuate what your opinions are, but maybe it'd be great to hear, if you hear words like that when a startup is coming to you, what's kind of your general reaction?
Yeah, so when I hear the word platform, my immediate question is scale, right? So in order, if you're going to develop a platform, you think the likes of Apple and then those types of things, it's all about scalability. So if someone does come with that kind of platform concept and mindset, my mind is going to go to how are you going to scale that and scale it fast and all the things that come with that. I do think, and maybe platforms are wrong term, and we may get into this conversation later around the need for connectivity. So yes, clearly there are digital assets clearly meeting unmet needs, and we're going to get to a point, particularly in the OR environment, that how are these assets going to talk to each other? I think there is an opportunity for companies to look at how do these all pieces fit together, and just particularly from my kind of background of the operating theatre. But I wouldn't say platform is a dirty word, but I would suggest though that it's a big call when people talk about, oh, you know, this platform. I think for me, it's all about scale and what does that look like, and why your platform versus another, and breadth that you can target around that.
Good feedback. And there's another question here about kind of business models. So maybe what you're looking for or your experience so far with kind of, and it says one-time sale versus service business model. So I guess in the med device context, you know, again, it's kind of, you know, maybe hardware versus software, and kind of, yeah, if you have a preference there.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, you know, a number of years ago I would have said we do hardware and do it very well, but clearly that dynamic's changing, and medtech's changing, and getting used to the software side, and you've got the trailing revenue and those types of things. Certainly we're very, very much interested in kind of what that looks like. You know, it can make sense where appropriate. So in my mind, it's less about whether it's hardware or software. It's about, you know, what unmet need it's being kind of solved in that aspect. But yeah, certainly we're open to hardware and software, and you know, clearly there is a desire. This is moving to somewhat to a hardware and software play. So if you're not capable, if you don't have the capabilities to play in both, then certainly in my mind you're going to get left behind. So there is a necessity, I think, to be able to play in that both those markets, and what that looks like from a deal structure perspective. We're very open to looking at a number of different types of deal models and packaging it all up, having some sort of trailing revenue from a software perspective, or whatever it might look like. Yep.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you know, of course, there's many types of medical devices, but I think if an innovator is starting with the mentality this is a one-time sale, then that already might be the wrong foot to start on, right? I mean, that's not really a concept that works anymore, I think, and that's including on the healthcare provision side, right? I mean, it's a continuum. Maybe one final question here, and then we'll move on, and I'm going to kind of rephrase this one a little bit. So, you know, J&J, you've got medical device, you've got pharmaceutical, you've got consumer health. If a startup company, maybe in the digital or other area, that can kind of cut across multiple portfolios, how would a company like that navigate at J&J or through you? How does that work?
Sure. And look, to be honest, within the J&J ecosystem, just internally, we can be better at connecting between device and pharma and consumer. However, you know, as I mentioned before, a lot of these frameworks, whether it's the innovation centers or the innovation center in Shanghai, J-Labs, they're very agnostic when it comes to whether it's a drug or a device or some consumer product. And certainly we have experts in all areas. And we have people based in Singapore who represent the Innovation Centre, who really focus on the early stage startup. Nilesh, many of you may know him. And you know, his expertise is to look at his remit, not only pharmaceuticals or consumer. His remit is to look at all across the board. So there is frameworks to enable us to look at kind of what it looks like from a holistic perspective. You know, certainly we do have our three sectors, right? And you know, clearly one thing which we always ask is, you know, how does this fit in with the strategy of the local of device or the strategy of farm? So that's something that we continue to have fairly vertical, but there are opportunities that kind of bridge that. And I think, to be honest, our lung cancer initiative is a great example of that, where, you know, we're not tackling lung cancer initiative from just pharmaceuticals or just device. It's very much a broad unmet need we're targeting from all consumer, pharma and medical device.
Great. The benefits and challenges of having so many portfolios, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks. And there's a lot more questions coming in. I think some of them, though, we can kind of do in the group discussion later. So to everyone listening, please do continue to send those in. We see them. But for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of move forward to the next presenter. So thanks, Peter, and we'll come back to you. Okay, so our next speaker, again, we're very fortunate to have, and I hope everyone on the phone can appreciate that, Frederick Herpin from Steris, and he's the Vice President of the Asia Pacific Operations. And Fred has more than 20 years experience in the surgical space, so a very deep expert as it pertains to that area. So looking forward to hear from him. And yeah, Fred, over to you. Hopefully your internet is stable.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. So Steris, for those who don't know very well Steris, we're a US company headquartered in Ohio, close to Cleveland. And if you can move to the next slide. So these are the broad numbers. So we're a 2.8 billion company with 12,000 associates. And maybe worth noticing, you know, two facts here. We have quite a good balanced revenue stream. We focus not only on capital equipment, we focus a lot on recurring revenue. And the other aspect is so far only, 30% roughly of our revenue are outside of the US. And that's part of the mandate that I have, is really to grow this part of outside US revenue, either, you know, organically or inorganically, but then we need to expand really our footprint in Asia, because if you look at those facts, we're pretty much a North American centric organization. If you can move to the next slide. And the funny story about the Steris history is actually, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide here, in 1988, Steris was founded, and Steris was actually a startup company. And it's actually the startup company that purchased the big company called Amsco Sterilizer. So with the help of some financial institution, the startup purchased a large organization and tapped on the network of the large organization. And pretty much, if you look at the history of Steris, we've grown through acquisition, quite small or large, but it has been a big part of our history. If you can move to the next slide. So this is roughly the diagram of the acquisition over the last 6 years. And I won't go into the details, but it's worth understanding what we've done through this acquisition. So basically, we were not present in some area of healthcare, for instance, the service business inside hospitals. And we decided to consolidate that business in the US. There were a lot of startups. We made the acquisition of several startups in the US, and we created a whole division around that. And later on, we expanded that internationally. There are also other acquisitions we made, or partnership, very niche segments. And these acquisitions, they are still, I would say, these companies are still almost running as standalone. They are part of the Steris network, but we leave them in peace. We just use the leverage of the network internationally, but the R&D is independent. The product development is still independent, and they can still fuel their own product development. Moving on to the next slide. So in total, what we've done over the last 5 years, over 20 acquisitions. And then if you ask me what are the different objectives of these acquisitions, we had one which was the product segments. We identified some product segments which were with some potential, similar to J&J, you know, with the lung cancer. We identified that GI was a good area for us. So we tapped into that. Also, we had a look at some very specific innovation. Some startups, you know, they are very nimble. They provide very focused research. So we all know that when you're in a multinational, sometimes the R&D process can be a bit heavy. And that's why we tapped on the resources of startups, because we know they have a very focused approach to innovation and very niche initiatives. And the last point I mentioned earlier on was the geographic footprint. We don't have currently a large presence in APAC from a manufacturing or from an R&D perspective, and we want to expand that. So that's also part of the mandate that we have, you know, in exploring several collaboration with startups. And as I mentioned, you know, for us, we don't have one size fits all with startups, you know. Sometimes integration can be fairly quick because we see there are a lot of synergies between our big organization and the startup organization. But sometimes we prefer to leave it as a standalone company because things are working fine and just taking advantage of the Steris network. Next slide. So these are our 4 areas where we're exploring for you know, collaboration with startups. First one, healthcare product. So it's basically all equipment for surgical theaters, sterile processing departments, and that involves both the capital equipment, the service, and the consumables. The second category, what we call HSS, is actually a division we created through acquisition and through partnership. We provide now services to hospitals. There are a lot of hospitals who are looking at, you know, outsourcing washing and sterilization. So that's an activity we provide. The third one, applied sterilization technologies. We provide contract sterilization both for medical device and the pharma industry. Again, that's an area we've acquired over time and that we've built through acquisition. And the last one is the life science part. We do almost similar product as the healthcare product, but really dedicated to pharma and labs. Next slide. And one of the area we really focus on through our partnership, we want to have a very balanced revenue stream. So if you're asking me, you know, what is the best candidate, you know, for a partnership with a startup, I wouldn't say it's only purely the capital equipment. We're really looking at different revenue stream, whether it can generate, you know, service or whether there are also consumables associated with it. So we want to keep that in mind in the future for our partnerships. Next slide. And obviously, you know, working in a big multinational, you know, it's important to not to forget that sustainability is a key word, you know. So we want to have ethical business practices. We focus on energy and conservation. We care also about our people and about our environment. We don't want to do business at any cost. Sustainability has to be achieved through all the processes that we do.
All right. Thank you, Fred. And your internet sustained, so that's good. Yes, so I mean, clearly as Steris grows, both in terms of category as well as geography, lots of opportunities for partnership there. So I hope people on the phone get excited about that. But also, I think it reiterates for the, let's say, innovators that want to connect with a corporate. I mean, you really need to understand what is your structure, what is your ambition, what are your growth areas, right? Because you have to understand the nuances of how every company is structured. So again, thanks for taking us through that. I noticed a few people, so there are some questions, I'll pose these to you. A few people are kind of raising their hands, but you just have to put in your question in the chat so we can see it. So thanks everyone. Just on the kind of points of growth into the region. So a good question here, a bit challenging, but let's have a go for it. I mean, I think a lot of the startups that are originating from Asia are looking west because of maybe a more viable business model in terms of, let's say, price points and things like that. But clearly a lot of unmet needs still in Asia, and that's why Steris is trying to grow here. So what advice would you have for startups who are kind of originating themselves in Asia, maybe want to partner with Steris in the region, but face this kind of price point, business model viability challenge, right? I mean, what's kind of Steris's perspective on this?
So I would say our approach is very progressive. If a startup is in one of the region, I would first explore that region, you know, because this is very near. The most probably the knowledge of the market is more in depth, and the cost to market are minimal. And later on, yeah, because you have a partnership with a larger organization, you can explore, you know, Western Europe or North America. But I think the key for any company is to do a step-by-step process. You need to have priorities, and you cannot go. I know the world is large. There are a lot of unmet needs. You know, the healthcare market in North America and Europe is huge. But really, the important part is getting some success in the markets you're currently in, and then scaling up later on.
Yeah, and I think some strategies I've seen too for the startups are, you know, you can have concurrent paths going, right? I mean, you can be concurrently a B2B strategy and B2C of different product types, different price points. You can do some market validation in countries that, you know, where maybe the price point is lower, but you're getting greater scale and use of your idea before you expand, right? So I think there's different options there, and probably working with a company like Steris, they can explore that. Here's another good questions. So obviously you're doing lots of partnerships and you're very open to partnerships. Are you waiting for the startups to come to you, or are you proactively going out there? How is Steris working in that sense?
Good question. Both ways, I think. You know, it's like matchmaking. Sometimes you approach, sometimes you get approached. We're open, and I think having a brief overview of what are our key imperatives. I think the audience will understand better that you know, we don't want to explore any healthcare area. We have a very focused approach, and I think it will help, you know, initiating some discussions.
Great. Maybe one last one for you here that came in, and I wasn't entirely clear on the question, but I'm going to kind of phrase it so that we can cover both angles. So from a talent perspective, and I think this is something we can come back to in the broader discussion, but what kind of talent profiles on the Steris side, as you're entertaining discussions with the startup, do you have around the table? So different profiles, and equally, what do you look for on the startup side? What kind of profiles, you know, get you excited from a people perspective?
Very good question. I think it doesn't change, you know, whether it's a startup or whether you're doing recruiting. You need to understand if the person can have a good fit with your organization. Obviously, experience, creativity, you know, knowledge is always important. But for us, it's really the fit within our organization, which is critical. Sometimes, you know, when we do recruitment, maybe there is a very high potential candidate, but if we see that it's going to disturb the dynamic of the team, you prefer not to recruit that person. I would say with a startup, I would have similar approach. You know, it's important to keep the dynamic you have globally, and there needs to be some cultural fit on both sides.
Great, thank you. And again, we're getting some more questions, but let me keep the presentations going, and then we
Sure.
can come up and have some group discussions. So thanks a lot, Fred. Okay, and the kind of third and final presentation. Thanks, Anselm, for being patient there. We have Anselm Tan, who's the head of corporate venturing in Asia Pacific for Philips. So again, very fortunate to have someone like him joining to give us a real perspective from the inside of his company there. And I know Anselm is on many startup boards around the region, so he's very active in the community and again has a lot of knowledge about the kind of interplay here between large and small. So Anselm, if you can hear me, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Gabriel and the APACMed team for organizing this series and inviting us. I think our industry is increasingly poised for collaboration at scale. Although significant challenges remain, governments are adopting digital-first health strategies, regulation is moving faster, and advances are promising. My name is Anselm Tan. I'm running our corporate ventures and partnerships program in the region. I'm based here in Singapore, and for those of us here, we are at the midway point through the circuit breaker measures, so hang in there. I'll spend the next few minutes to introduce Philips, our goals, our focus areas, as well as our external innovation and venture strategy. At Philips, we have reinvented ourselves several times over the last 128 years. We have expanded from a lightings company to a diversified industrial conglomerate. We are currently taking strategic portfolio choices in our transformation to a health tech company. Today, we are based in more than 100 countries. Our goal is to improve the lives of 3 billion people a year by 2030. In 2019, we calculated this to be 1.6 billion people. But to do this, we will need to listen to people's needs and to each other. And above all, we will need to come together with partners to make it happen. We are also making some fundamental shifts. We are shifting from selling products alone to selling solutions and building long-term relationships with customers. In the healthcare domain, we do this by teaming up with care providers through strategic partnerships to innovate and transform the way care is delivered and co-create solutions. By solutions, we mean logical bundles of products, devices, systems, software, and services aimed at solving customer needs more comprehensively and better than individual set of products would do. So on this slide, you see that Philips is organized around customer needs, bringing together relevant capabilities to best develop and bring to market solutions. We do this by taking a view of people's health journeys, as shown in our view of the health continuum, starting with healthy living and prevention, precision diagnosis, and personalized treatment to care in the home, where the cycle to healthy living begins again. Our businesses are organized around 3 clusters. There's on the left, personal health, focusing on healthy living and preventive care. This segment comprises our personal care, domestic appliances, oral health care, and mother and child care businesses. In the middle, we have diagnosis and treatment. This focuses on precision diagnosis, disease pathway selection, and image-guided, minimally invasive treatments. Over here, we have diagnostic imaging, ultrasound, and diagnostic informatics businesses as some examples. And finally, connected care. Connected care focuses on patient care solutions, advanced analytics, and patient and workflow optimization, both inside and outside the hospital. The segment comprises monitoring and analytics, therapeutic care, population health management, and our sleep and respiratory care businesses. So in our next slide, external innovation is a key focus in our strategy. The company recognizes and acknowledges that no one company can address all the needs along the health continuum. Philips is addressing global healthcare challenges, but we are not doing this alone. We do this with partners. In our venture and partnership strategy, we provide venture capital funding and collaborate with promising health tech startup companies aimed at improving patient outcomes across the health continuum and provide access to affordable care. Our strategy in our venture investing is to invest in promising startups that can serve as long-term commercial partners to achieve Philips' aim of delivering patient-centric solutions throughout the health continuum. For investments, I'll go a bit into more detail about this. For investments, we syndicate all deals with the venture community, including with VCs around the region, including our Singapore government partners, such as EDBI and Enterprise Singapore. Company maturity is usually at early commercialization when they are raising their Series A or B financing rounds. For partnerships, we take a collaborative approach to drive digital transformation. There are several ways we do this. For example, creating an integrated offering that is provided as one solution to the customer, where the products interface or integrate to deliver joint value under distinct brands. It may also be in the form of partner referrals with solutions marketed and sold under separate brands. Common themes along our investment include data and analytics, automation, clinical decision support, intelligent care pathways, just to name a few. And finally, our next slide, helping our customers address the quadruple aim. Resource constraints are driving a shift to value-based healthcare. There is significant value in more integrated forms of healthcare, and the focus of our investments as well as our collaborations are towards delivering on what we define as the quadruple aim, which is to improve the health of individuals and populations, improving the patient experience, improving the work life of our health professionals, and finally reducing the cost of care. Happy to take questions afterwards and hear from the rest. Back to you, Chris.
Great, thanks, Anselm. And yes, we'll pause on you for a minute and do a few questions just for Philips. Already some stuff coming in. I mean, I think Philips perhaps one of the greatest examples in recent memory of a true organizational pivot, right? I mean, you talked about from light bulbs now to basically being a pure healthcare company. I mean, we don't see such a pivot as often these days. So a couple of the questions in here are just related. What is the balance that you're seeing at the moment in terms of startups or venturing between pure hardware or kind of hardware software, or maybe pure software? What's the balance, and what are you looking for?
Right, we are seeing that the balance or more activities increasingly around the software space in digital health. Having said that, I still believe that medical devices, the hardware components are essential. The wearables, the way you monitor patients, and build sensors around the technologies. I think that remains an essential piece. It depends on really the value proposition and what the unmet need is being addressed here, on determining whether it's software play or hardware play or a combination of both. At Philips, we are recognizing also that a number of trends are supporting trends in favor of digital health. Digitization has reached the point in healthcare where value is shifting from standalone products to solutions. And there's also increasing consumer engagement in our own health, creating these opportunities to focus more on healthy living through digital solutions.
Great, thanks. And a sort of related follow-up question, and this may be a bit technical, but let's have a go at it. So on the software side, there's a question here about how does Philips support SaaS or software as a service? And my guess is the question here pertains to the fact that there's some additional requirements that would be involved with, let's say, Philips partnering with a pure software player, right? Whether it be the different regulations they must meet, or the way that data privacy, for example. So does Philips kind of have an approach or mechanism by which they would deal with a kind of pure software player?
Yes, in our approach to work with partners, we follow a process, and that involves assessment on what we call a privacy impact assessment. We have colleagues in information technology security departments and compliance to look into these aspects to ensure that the personal data of our customers are adequately protected. With software as a service, I think there are numerous configurations of how SaaS plays can be offered, either as a standalone solution or as part of an integrated solution proposal. I think it's a matter of understanding the customer needs and tailoring the relevant modules to address how they can consume the solution and how they would finance for it.
Thanks. Maybe one final question here for Philips specifically that came in. So within your connected care portfolio, maybe you could just talk more specifically about some of the focus areas. And there's a question here about whether, for example, sleep health is within focus. Maybe you could talk about within connected care, what is kind of some of the focus areas there?
Sure. On sleep, in the region itself, there is a high prevalence of undiagnosed people or the population with OSA, for example, obstructive sleep apnea. We are looking at solutions that can assist or support bringing these patients into the funnel to address their needs at earlier rather than later. In the sleep and respiratory care business, which is a core focus for the company. We focus, we have solutions from diagnosis to sleep therapies and treatments in the homes as well as in the hospitals. Increasingly, we are also shifting towards a home sleep test model, for example, as well as home sleep diagnosis. So respiratory is one of the focus areas for Philips, together with cardiovascular, oncology, and mother and child care.
Thanks. Okay, so thanks everyone for sending your questions. I've been noting as we've gone through the ones that haven't been addressed yet. So at this stage, we've got a good sort of 20 minutes to just open it up and really take questions for the group, and I'll be relaying some of this. Before we do that, we'll run poll number 3 here just to see if we've managed to convert some of the non-believers so far on the call. So APACMed, please administer poll number 3 here. Okay, probably share the results. So also my thanks for the speakers for sharing your perspective, and I hope everyone can appreciate to hear from the inside how some of these companies are working, but clearly there's still some non-believers or naysayers out there, probably based on experiences that they've had, good or bad, which is perfectly fair. So the best way to move this is please do ask your tough questions, and we'll try to answer them. So at this stage, the questions I ask are for the group. So Peter, Anselm, Frederick, please unmute and just feel free to answer as you please. One of the questions that had come in while Frederick was talking was, I think he mentioned the Steris kind of model is a bit more of a operating the integrated companies more standalone. And of course, there's different partnerships depending on how much ownership you would take, et cetera. But maybe it'd just be interesting to hear, perhaps Peter and Anselm, and then Fred, if you want to add any other comments there. But what is your kind of typical way of working with a startup in terms of how much oversight and operational control that you would expect to take?
Yeah, just Chris, are you talking when we partner with them and from there, or even pre-partnering?
Well, I guess I was thinking once the relationship is formalized, but even if you want to speak to pre that too, I mean, I'm sure people would love to hear what is the J&J model, right? So. Yeah,
so I mean, there's a lot of courting that happens clearly, and you know, goals need to align. Let me just probably touch on, and this is an interesting conversation when you've partnered with a company, and the question is, from a J&J perspective, how hands-on do we get versus hands-off? It probably depends, right? So in the case of an acquisition, and particularly in the digital side, lately we've taken probably the hands-off approach, and this is, we certainly have found that, and I think Fred touched a little bit earlier, where you've got companies who are doing some great work, and they just need to continue to do that to a point in which where we want to fold them into the broader framework. So a great example of that is Orthotaxi, which is a digital robot for knee procedures we acquired a couple of years ago. We continue to let them develop their product in France, and then within their own ecosystem, without coming down on too heavy-handed on J&J processes and things like that. So we want to give the startup the agility that it has without bringing the J&J kind of policies and processes and all those types of things. So that's a careful thing that we certainly consider. And then probably more of a lighter touch on the partnership side. You know, when we're courting a partner, we really try to understand what are their needs, where they're trying to get to, and how does J&J partner with them to get to those needs. And sometimes it's market access, and certainly we have our expertise in-house on that space. Sometimes it's connections to key surgeons in the medical device area or other healthcare areas in relation to that. So it's really trying to find out what does this startup want? How can they partner with J&J to achieve that? And it's got to be more than money. And we're much more interested in a much more integrated partnership rather than a more of a transactional one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And some, how about you at Philips? What's the model there?
Sure. When we work with startups or where we make minority investments into startup companies, they still pretty much function independently. Like Peter mentioned, agility is one of the strengths. We wouldn't want to consume or diminish that a competency of theirs by layering processes on top of theirs. So startups continue to function independently. We work with startups on a case-by-case basis across various areas, depending on what they need and what we can offer. In cases, it could be areas of design thinking, clinical strategy, or regulatory pathway development. There could also be instances that we have done in providing market access, and this comes in the form of introductions to customers. Upon understanding what the customers' needs are, we would be in a position and our teams to try to match make in that regard, and understand what the startup can offer and make the relevant introductions.
Thanks. Fred, this question was based on what you've already explained to everyone. So anything else to add there, or you're okay for now?
No, I think that our experience, and I would join my colleagues here, is most of the startups, they, depending on your due diligence analysis, but the key point is most of the time they need more help on the market access side. That's what we've noticed so far.
Mm. Yeah, and I think sometimes operational control or standalone, I mean, this should be viewed as a pathway to scale and part of the partnership model, right? So at every scenario, and company is going to have their flexible way of working. So it's a good question, and thanks for the answers. Okay, here's another one, and I think this question has kind of got two sides to it. So the question is around novel contracting models, right? So maybe you guys can answer it in two ways. One is, what are the kind of novel forms of contracting that you see to engage with your customer, which is the health systems? How are your companies evolving to, make contracting work a bit better, let's say? And then similarly, if you've got any kind of creative or novel contracting that would happen between, let's say, a multinational and a small company, are you seeing any new ways of thinking there too? So whoever wants to go first, please go ahead. But not all at once. There you go, Peter. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, one thing we've been looking to, and to be honest, I don't know how novel it is per se, I think it's happening in other companies are doing, is the whole concept around risk sharing, right? So, certainly we know hospitals are under pressure from a financial perspective, more patients coming through the door. So, certainly we're looking at risk sharing models around the region. Infection is a good example of that. And how does that work? And that's going to look different depending what country, and there's some laws and regulatory items in relation to that piece. But I think that's an interesting concept around this kind of risk sharing notion where we share the risk and also gain on the upside as well. So I think there's probably some of the more novel concepts, and that's been played out more so in other countries than others. And in regards to partnering with startups, one thing that we really like to see is, again, probably not that novel, is a milestone approach. And this really creates focus, not only for the corporates being ourselves, but also for the startup. And then the injection of capital or whatever it might look like associated with those milestones. We find that really gives a real good focus to the startup, knowing where they need to spend their time to get that next payment, but also aligning on common strategic objectives within the startup and strategic.
Yeah, I've noticed a kind of, it's a ripple effect, right? I mean, whatever's happening in the macro or on the customer side is going to have a ripple effect to every other aspect of the organization. So that's great how you can kind of see that alignment there. Anselm, yeah, go ahead, Anselm. Yeah,
for novel contracts, one of the form this is taking within Philips is as we make those shifts from, on a more transactional basis with customers to a solutions type approach. There we are entering into longer term relationships and contractual arrangements with customers. This can extend to 15, 20-year type partnerships. And this could include not only the software, hardware, services side of things, but it may also include financing. Often it would also add on third-party capabilities into such a contracts with customers, and these third parties may include our startup partners as well.
Anything to add?
Yeah, from our side, we see a lot of fee per procedure requests from hospitals. I think especially in APAC, you know, there is a high constraints on hospital capex. So they are trying to find creative way to financing some new type of surgeries, and rather than investing in very expensive and heavy equipment, they are trying to find ways to share the cost, either you know, with a local partner or with a multinational. But the fee per surgery is really the up and coming trend we see in a lot of countries in APAC.
Yeah, and it sort of goes back to the triangle diagram I showed earlier. I mean, in my opinion, for the startups, it's never too early to already be thinking about how the broader health system is going to work and how you're going to help be a solution, not a challenge to that, and financing is key. So I think all of you guys have answered that quite well. Okay, well, let's get a bit negative for a moment. It's good. Obviously, you saw the statistics from the poll, so let's address this. Where do things go wrong? And I think, please, let's be as specific and you know, practical as possible here. I mean, not everything is going to work perfectly. So where have things gone wrong, and what was the cause of that? And anyone?
Okay,
go ahead, Fred.
I'll start. Peter, you started with the first difficult question, so I'll start with the second one. I think the difficult aspect, and that's one of the slides you mentioned, Chris, is when we get approached by startups, you know, they feel that we're multinational, so we have an open checkbook, and they tend also to forget that they have a value and they are not totally realistic. So we need to have some kind of alignment with regards to the expectations, both from, you know, the capital outlay we're ready to spend, and also their real market value. Sometimes it's in our approach with startups, we prefer not to take the full equity and have only a minority share, and then 2 or 3 years down the road say, well, if you achieve this value, then we can buy you out. But if you don't achieve that, we don't do it. So the financial aspect is always a bit touchy in the discussions.
Thanks.
So for us, many things can go wrong. Things can go wrong in the communications and expectations. But we have cases where, you know, we have worked with companies successfully to win deals. But you know, things may go wrong in the execution of the project management side of things. I think in those instances, it's a matter about being transparent and overly communicate with your partner, and there are also learnings to be developed along the way. Process is also something that we're trying to improve in our relationships and partnerships with early stage companies. Process can be an enabler, it can also be an obstacle. What we are trying to do is to build within Philips the structural ability for scalable innovation partnerships. This involves processes to fast track our approaches for early validation and to de-risk joint propositions before broader commercial rollouts.
Peter?
I'm going to spin your question to a positive. I agree with my previous colleagues, but I suppose when I see startups do it right in their engagement with corporates, and in my mind it is when they've done their homework. I think you mentioned that in your earlier slide. I think that's spot on. I think those startups that really understand what the corporate looking at, as opposed to they're just a big company with lots of money and an open checkbook, to Fred's point. Is when startups really do their homework and clearly communicate how their product or their solution or whatever it is fits within the strategic direction or nature of that multinational, then that's when the conversation gets really, really interesting. And certainly I can tell when companies have done their homework and they haven't. Those that are just thinking, oh, it's a multinational and I'm going to speak to this multinational today and that multinational tomorrow, and just kind of this kind of scattergun approach. You can pick those versus the other startups that understand really how their product fits in with the strategy of J&J or medical devices or diffuse synthese, if you're talking about sub-franchises within J&J, or diffuse synthese joints or diffuse synthese spines. So they've really gone about doing their homework really, really thoroughly. And I think it is those companies that, in my mind, have more success than those that don't.
Yeah, sometimes I talk to startups that are confused or frustrated by the processes they have to go through of engaging with the multinational, but it's part of it, right? I mean, everybody's trying to move quickly, but it has to be diligent, and the supply of ideas is exceeding the demand capacity, right? So that in a way, the process itself is a bit of a weed out, I think, for some of the process. So I hope the startups can understand that part. Maybe just one final kind of question here, and then we'll get on to your last words of wisdom. So I'm going to kind of package a couple things together, and hopefully it's a pretty straightforward question. But to what degree are you guys engaging with pre-commercial startups versus maybe ones that have a kind of commercially validated model? And do your companies kind of openly share the market intel that you've got along the way with these pre-commercial or other innovators, or what's your model there? Maybe Anselm, start with you.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's my turn, isn't it? Right. We engage both with startup companies in the pre-commercial phases as well as after they have commercial validation. The balance is more towards companies who are commercializing their services or solutions at an earlier stage. That is so that we can activate a more forms of partnerships. It could be commercial partnerships in the nearer horizon. So we are engaged more often with companies with product and commercial traction, early traction. In the pre-commercial stages, I think there we tend to look at more on what the strategic alignment is in terms of what we want to address, what the needs are for the business, what gaps do we have as a company, and how long does it take to fill this gap with our partners. Do we share market insights? Yes, we do share market insights. I think to the extent where our colleagues and teams have the expertise in the relevant fields, we'll provide insights to what our customers are looking for, what the pain points are, things that we have tried, and tested, and things that have worked and haven't. Likewise, I think useful and helpful insights goes both ways. It's not only from the corporate to the startup, but startups are in a position to, I think, experiment, test, and build their business model as well, more agilely to extract some of those insights.
Good answer, thanks. Peter, how about you?
As I mentioned in my opening, we certainly connect with pre-revenue and post-revenue, and we have avenues to do that. I certainly particularly see a lot of early stage companies. I'd like to see, to be honest, a few more later stage companies within this region. Companies that have established themselves in one market perhaps and then looking to expand into other markets. Certainly one thing that we look at is attractiveness not only to one country and their ecosystem, but it's to be able to kind of scale to other countries in Asia Pacific. And I know that's difficult because it's a bit of a hot pot in terms of regulatory, different countries and needs and the like, but certainly that's what we look for. So I'd like to see more kind of established companies in countries looking to expand. So that's one. Yeah, certainly we do in the right avenues share kind of market data, and we have teams to do that. We also allow KPMG to share to be the experts and and provide their market data to everyone as well. So often lean on them as well.
Good shout out. I like it. Okay, Fred. Yeah.
So I'll be slightly different here from my colleague. Basically, for Steris, we don't look at pre-revenue partnership. We have a pretty hard stance on that, but we much prefer a startup that has started, selling, and it makes, I would say, the discussions easier and straightforward. So that's why we never have a look at any pre-revenue acquisition.
Good. Okay, what about the market intel aspect? You guys share that too, or?
Market intel aspects, yes, we do because we like also to collaborate. So definitely, but like Peter, we tend to rely also on outside sources.
Got it. Okay, well, thanks, guys. I know we're kind of coming to the end here, and I hope we addressed most of the questions that came through. So I appreciate all the engagement from the audience, and again, appreciate the speakers for having taken their time and shared their perspective. Maybe I just ask each speaker to give one final sentence if they can. Keep it pretty brief. You've seen the polling statistics, you've seen some of the questions come in. So what's one kind of final word of wisdom here? And you get bonus points if it aligns to the APACMed Founder Series initiative. So I'll leave that with each of you to decide. Peter, go ahead. How about you first?
I'll just give everyone a little secret on when we propose deals to top management in the US. I'll say when we put a deck together to get approval to partner with a startup, we essentially have to cover 3 questions, and that is why this space. So why should J&J get into this space? Second question is why this company as opposed to another company, and the third question is how does J&J create value? So for those startups out there and you're looking at that, if you can essentially answer those 3 questions, you've basically written my business model for me, and that helps when it comes to getting things signed off at corporate. So I'll leave you with those 3 things: why this space, why this company, and how does J&J create value?
Great, thank you. Anselm?
Sure. Being a corporate strategic alignment is key for us. So, some of the questions that Peter mentioned resonates, particularly for us, why now as well, and how we play. Like Chris mentioned earlier, collaboration. For collaborations, supply exceeds demand. So companies, both the corporate and startup partners, should be looking for mutual ways to win.
Perfect. Fred?
For me, I would see it more as a sentence, as a joke. I think you can pretty up the bride, but don't put too much makeup. It's we've got always surprises as soon as you remove the makeup, and that's something we don't like to find out.
Yeah, and I think in a way, the thought that strings all of it together is, you don't need to overcomplicate the situation, right? I mean, you answer what corporates need, and you go with that. So, great. Thanks again, guys. I know we're running out of time. Appreciate you having taken the time and been so open with your thoughts. I mean, interesting in the polling that I think most people believe in the ecosystem of healthcare, but maybe still there's some, ways we need to find ourselves and work out how to improve healthcare. I do believe that in the current context, a lot of the average people and companies' health literacy has gone up quite a bit now. So perhaps an opportunity to take these partnerships forward. And no greater place to do it than APACMed Founder Series, right, Gabriel? So that's my extra bonus point. I kick it over to you to close us out here.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much to Chris and all the panelists, Peter, Anselm, and Fred. I really enjoyed this session. Just a few closing thoughts. I think when we started this webinar, we did the first poll, and 87% of those who participated in the poll said they were seeking partnership. And through this webinar, we also understand that corporates are also open to partnership. So I think we have a match there. But as Chris mentioned in his presentation, I really like that thought, that key takeaway about the supply exceeding demand. As startups, we need to look at how we engage with corporates, and a few key takeaways are from the panelists is one, I think strategic alignment. A lot of things are being said about having strategic fit, having a focused approach, having a good fit, so I think that's one. The second thing is really to, understand what is the customer's needs. Pete has mentioned about the transformative value to patient. We've talked about unmet needs. That is a second key takeaway. And last but not least, Fred also mentioned about expectations. Not just because, and Peter as well, not just because you're looking at partnering with a J&J. You have wild expectations of the partnership. So those are very, very good reminders. So I just want to thank you once again for participating in this webinar. And I really look forward to having you at our next webinar on 20th of May, where we look at product innovation through human-centered design. So meanwhile, take care and stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.